Happy, joy.
The Army values, the Warrior ethos, coaching, and therapy. This is Warrior Leadership. This is Warrior Leadership. Hello, everybody. My name is JJ Hardy, the coach, and
this is DB, the therapist. Let's go.
DB, the therapist. Let's go. So this is number 2 of our series on toxic leadership. And today we are going to discuss the impact that toxic leadership has on team morale. And this is going to be a good one. And, I got the right guy on the call to talk about this with me. So this is going to be interesting because I know that he's had work environments and maybe even a current one where everyone has interesting stuff happen in the workplace. So we can talk about these things and it can be in real time. So DB, what do you think of, I know we had a whole call last week about this, but what do you think of when you think of toxic leadership as it affects team morale?
Well, it affects morale in the way that, leaders' goals are to drive productivity, right? In any organization, it doesn't matter what product or service you're selling. We want to increase productivity, increase productivity, increase profit. Increasing profit keeps everyone happy, right? The problem with that is that when you drive productivity using strategies that are traits of a toxic leader, which we're really going to go into that today, what ends up happening is that people will do what's right in front of you, but then they will take their time back when you're not looking. So I'll give you a great example of this, and this is documented. So during slavery, right, one of the things that the slave master would do is they would use violence and aggression to get slaves to work harder and to instill fear, so that way they wouldn't leave the plantation and they would continue to work hard and drive productivity. There is documentation that shows that those slaves would do things like, destroy portions of the crop or, slack off when the master wasn't there. So that's human psychology. That's what happens. And so I'm using that example as an extreme, but that is human nature to when you feel like you're in an oppressive system, and a toxic leadership could feel like that to some people. Like, if I'm being honest with you, the reason why I went, and that sounds like dramatization, the example I use, but if you've worked in an environment with a toxic leader, you feel like they're the master and you're the slave. And it's you can hear, like, I've had coworkers cry and break down because of the behavior of a toxic leader on them. And so, and then you could just hear you could tell that they feel like they're in bondage, if that makes sense. And that's why I use that extreme example like that. I normally would not use an example like that, but this toxic leadership is so detrimental to people's well-being and to the well-being of an organization that, we really have to be mindful of this. I've had so many good people, man. I've watched good people leave the career as a whole because of a toxic leader.
So you're completely right. I want to add a little bit to that. So in my teachings, especially the live ones, people have heard me say this many times. If you've seen one of my webinars or if you've watched me do a live training before on social media, but when you focus on the tasks and statistics, but you don't focus on the welfare of your people, that is what creates toxic leadership. And I'm going to go ahead and say that a lot of people, without any formal training on how to properly lead and influence others, fall into this because they're so worried about the work getting done. From higher, they're not going to necessarily ask about the people. That's your job as the first line leader. Your job as that first line leader is to make sure your people are taken care of. That way, when your numbers start going crazy, you can address the real time issues that are going on. But if you lead from your office, you can't do that. And so oftentimes toxic leadership is unintentional, but there are times that it's not. So punishing and not rewarding, bringing people in and telling and having a session with them and only telling them where they can improve and never asking where you can improve. That's a small, tiny bit of how you can create a toxic environment. And so check it out. There are many things. And I like to use the emotional piggy bank, right, as an example. And we are human beings. We have emotions. So if you have a piggy bank that somebody comes into the job and they are really excited to do that job, that piggy bank can be full. If they've had a bad experience with managers in the past, they might like the job, but that piggy bank might only be 2/3 full because they've already had some bad experiences in a workplace. But every single time that you do not feed into them, but you take from them, you're ruining your credibility and their appreciation in the workplace a little bit more every single time. And if you do that on a mass scale, then that means everybody is only doing what you tell them to do because they need the money, not because they enjoy doing the work or they enjoy the people in the work environment.
Right. Coach, you made a statement that I think is powerful, man. Sometimes toxic leadership is unintentional, but sometimes it's intentional.
Yes.
And so when it's intentional, I'm going to jump out there and say this. If you're engaging in toxic leadership behavior and you've been talked about it, your employees have, consistently, complained about psychological safety of the workplace, which is a direct reflection on you as a leader because you set the tone and you create the environment. If you're engaging in toxic leadership behavior and you're not working on changing that, what's the difference between that leader and a criminal? Seriously, like think about someone with a criminal mindset that is most of the time narcissistic. The world spins around on their axis. They lack empathy. So what makes that leader any different than that criminal? And I'm gonna put that out there as a question, because if you're doing it intentionally, so unintentionally, that means that someone can step in and the environment is safe enough where you as the leader will receive that feedback, because that's one of the the traits of a toxic environment or a toxic leader is that not willing to accept feedback. And so if you're intentionally doing it, then what should be the response of the environment? What should if someone is intentionally being a toxic leader and they know that they're a toxic leader, they've been coached, they've been talked to, they're refusing counsel, and they're continuing to be a tyrant, what responsibility or what right do people have in those situations, man?
Well, first of all, they don't have many rights as it pertains to being able to make any change or asking questions or whatever the case may be in the workplace. But the type of emotional environment that gives them is one where they feel powerless.
Yes.
Think of a past situation where not just you, DB, but anybody in the audience that you've gone into a situation, whether it was with your spouse, maybe with your parents, maybe with anybody, that you felt powerless. What were you thinking during that time? Were you excited? I don't think so, but maybe, I don't know. When you have zero responsibility and you don't have to worry about making decisions, some people enjoy that. I'm just going to be honest with you. Some people do enjoy that. I just have to show up here and do what the heck I'm told, and then I get to go home every day. Okay, that there are a select few that feel that way. However, there are many people that do not feel valued. There are many people that feel like they're not trusted. There are many people that feel like they can't make any decisions, that they constantly have somebody looking over their shoulder. I mean, there are many different things that come with that. And you know what? They also, though in the workplace, you don't necessarily want to like go head over heels for somebody. They don't feel any love. And love is only that emotion that is expressed towards another person when you care about them. It's not necessarily, hey, baby, how are you doing today? No, it's not that. It's just genuine concern, and you show, you're empathetic towards people.
Yeah.
You can either show empathy or you can show apathy. Apathy is usually what happens when somebody doesn't care about you.
Oh, that's good, Coach. You know, the value of human relationship, right? That's what it's all about. Like we've talked a lot about this, and our foundational philosophy in leadership is servant leadership, and servant leadership is synonymous with love.
Yes.
And this kind of toxic leadership that we're describing is synonymous with fear and hate.
Yes.
And that's important. And some people think, oh, well, here we go with this feel good stuff. This is work. I get that, right? I understand it's work, and you got to have professional boundaries. And I appreciate you defining love. It's not love in that way of like, I want to be in a relationship with you necessarily. I can still love and have professional boundaries. That doesn't mean like I don't go and have a drink with my coworkers. I don't go and hang out with them in that way, but I do show love. I show empathy and genuine compassion to the people that I work with, because we are on the battlefield. That's what warrior leadership is all about. When you go to work with someone every day, no matter what industry it is, you guys are on the front line of the battle at work. Even the McDonald's worker. You know, I've seen people walk into McDonald's restaurants and literally berate the person sitting across that counter, and then a teammate or someone comes in and helps them. But I've also seen the opposite of that happen, where people are kind of like sitting there ready to hit the record button. I know you've seen online where those individuals went postal inside of McDonald's. Like those are real situations, man, where it's real. Like, you know, you need that. And so when you say love, it's like, that's in my mind, I'm like, that's the servant leader showing up and being willing to be present with people, man. And that's what makes people, that in my opinion, that's what makes people want to work hard for you. That's what makes people work overtime for you.
And that's by the way, everything we're talking about, we haven't used the morale very often in this call, but really morale is the environment, the way people feel towards one another, the way that they think about their job, the way that they take action with their job. Morale affects all of those things. And DB, I like the way that you mentioned the idea of work being a battlefield. A lot of people don't feel that way, but it absolutely is. They say it's not a battlefield, but then they constantly have conversations with people about how they're constantly putting out fires.
Yeah.
I don't know of any person who's been in a management position that hasn't told me at one time or another that they're putting out fires on a constant basis. That's the thing you do. But if you're putting out fires on a constant basis, then that means your team is supporting that effort of putting out those fires. And coming from a military background, I am a warrior. I mean, I have to say it in my creed. I am a warrior and a member of the team. Serve the people of the United States and live the Army values. So when it comes to stuff like that, the person to your left and right matter. Your subordinates matter. That team that you have supporting that effort that you're responsible for every day, they matter. And by the way, that is your team. That is your group of people that rely on you every single day. And your peers, inadvertently, they also rely on you every day. They rely on your strength. They rely on your leadership. They rely on you to be the person that you need to be to make sure that your team is happy and can perform their job so that they can rely on you and your team at one time or another. And your boss, same thing. How can he trust you if you're not taking care of all of those things? And as the leader, you are the person who is responsible for the morale of your team. And if you don't care about those people, if you don't show them a little bit of love, then you're never going to be trusted by that group, which will probably make your peers not trust you as much. And your boss probably will not trust you as much. It's a ripple effect. People don't always think about the second and third order effects, but that's it. And if you want the person to your left and right to be able to rely on you, When things get hot, when you're putting out those fires, then care about your people. That's what it takes.
Or are they gonna let you burn up?
They're gonna let you burn. Hey, look at that. That dude's on fire. Hold on. Let's turn around and go do our job. Let's let this happen.
You know what? This is real life. And it's not selective empathy, right? I have empathy for those people that whether they're doing it intentionally or unintentionally, I have empathy for them because they have an expected end. And whether you could have everybody on your side and you could have people co-signing to your toxic leadership behavior, those that are doing it intentionally, but there's a saying, every dog has its day.
Yes.
Every dog has its day. It's only a matter of time. I don't care how much political power you have. I don't care how many people, how much authority you think you have. The truth is that if you just live long enough, and I never wish this on any toxic leader that I've ever had or any toxic leader that I see, it's like, if you keep going in that way, the enemy will be at the gates for you. So you can't go out there in the world and the universe and put out that kind of energy. And at some point, it doesn't come back and hit you like a ton of bricks. And at that point, because of your arrogancy, you won't be able to fight your way out of it. And I've watched people fall in that way. And so for those that are out there, as you think about this, if you're doing this intentionally or unintentionally, we really need you to be dialing in. And like the coach always says, you need to do a course correct today. Like you need to humble yourself, and probably what you probably need to do, you need to get a hold of a coach or a therapist, and you need to address those issues, because if you don't address those issues, it's not just going to affect you. It's going to affect your family. It's going to affect everybody. You could have built the biggest empire ever. If you're a toxic leader, it's going to come back to get you. It will. And so make those steps, man, to start changing, because, one of the most, like when I look at some of these 12 signs and we're talking about unintentionally versus intentionally, coach, if I'm being honest, I've exhibited some of these toxic leadership traits. I'm gonna just put myself out there now, especially because you opened it up and you said unintentional or intentional. I've unintentionally exhibited some of this behavior without even knowing it. Maybe I'm not a micromanager, right? Which is what most people think about when they think of toxic leadership, right? But am I really not a micromanager, or am I just saying that because I know it's a bad word?
Yeah.
So if I'm being honest, I have engaged in micromanaging behavior. Maybe it's not the same as the toxic leaders that I've had in the past, but if I really sit back and I'm introspective about what the idea of micromanaging means, right? I've done that. I have tried to control every detail of stuff, and I have tried to suffocate. Even thinking about my relationship, I've done that in my relationship with my wife, with my son. And so, do you see how even in this moment, the conviction of you saying unintentionally made me have that emotional intelligence and awareness to say, you know what? Before I judge harshly, have I exhibited that behavior before? And again, now because I'm bringing that to awareness, I have to course correct on that, because we know that micromanaging is a toxic leadership trait and we cannot do it, man.
Well, and you know what? As a servant leader, you should not be judging people that are misbehaving in this way anyway, because oftentimes it is unintentional. I mean, something so small as being indecisive for your team, that can cause the work environment to go down. I have this thing that I say during my first time leaders course, which by the way is not just for people that just get their management position. It's also for those senior executives, because if they've never had somebody tell them what it takes to be a successful servant leader, then they don't know. It's almost like when you're in the military, they give a safety briefing every Friday to the soldiers, because if they don't know that they can call and ask for a ride instead of drive drunk, then they are more likely to keep their keys in their pocket and get behind the wheel. But when you provide that education and awareness to people on what it takes to lead and create influence with your teams, and bring those toxic leadership traits to the surface and say, if you do this, You don't have to continue that way. You can do this instead.
Man,
It's a social responsibility to make this happen. Now, there are some people that will be all up in their ego and they'll let it affect their decision, and they'll automatically think, oh, I've been a manager for 25 years. There's absolutely no way that I'm toxic. I know exactly what I'm doing. Well, you know what? If that's your reaction to the statement that I just made, then you're probably full of shit. Pardon my language. But you need to know that these things can be addressed if you open your mind.
Man, you know what? I'm gonna tell you, man. You just saying the distinction between ended, and I know it's like I'm beating a dead horse, but I'm being honest. Like when you said intentional and unintentional, it immediately opened my mind. And then as I look at these 12 traits, it then makes me want to have an assessment tool to figure out where I'm at in each one of those areas, because we're all human, coach. At the end of the day, I don't know if anybody woke up one day and said, you know what? I want to train as hard as I can to become a toxic leader. Who does that? If you did that, honestly, if that really is you, that you woke up and said, I want to train to be a toxic leader, my intention is to get to become the most toxic as I can, well then, man, you know what? That you
shouldn't be managing anybody.
You probably shouldn't be managing anybody, right?
So let me take a step back from that a little bit too, Derek. So people rely on these assessment tools so much, and they have their value, especially when it comes to reporting the statistics. However, the most valuable way to evaluate yourself as a leader and figure out whether or not you're identifying these toxic traits is to ask the people you work with.
I knew you were going to go there. Every time I bring up an assessment tool, you thanks for keeping it. You're right. That's the coach. Thank you.
You are yourself.
Yes.
So taking a tool, you're going to answer things the way that you think they should be answered, not the way they should be answered.
Yep. And you know what? And that's good too, because the people who you know what that's making me think about, and maybe when maybe I'll share this information. I don't mind sharing it. There's a thing called a 360 leadership assessment, and it's not that kind of assessment where you just answer the questions about yourself. Like that's a part of it, but the other part is that you have to have 3 employees that work under you answer it at the minimum, and you have to have 3 bosses above you answer those same kind of questions, and you get feedback. You get feedback, real feedback, raw feedback from 6 different people about who you are as a leader. And, you know, to be honest with you, I'm happy that you brought that up, because if you're not careful, man, if you just assess yourself, and I noticed this about myself during my leadership assessment, I judge myself harshly. And I was like, I'm going to be honest, I was shocked when my peers and my bosses, like literally, they rated me way higher than I rated myself. I was hard on myself. I judged myself harshly because there was areas where like the maximum you can get was a 5. And I would give myself a 2 or a 3 in certain areas. And then the boss or the peer would give me a 4 or 5. And I'm like, what? But then their scores were consistent. These are different people that didn't talk to each other, didn't know that I sent it to them. And I'm like, wait a minute. My average score is a 4.3. And I gave myself a 3.
Yeah.
Why do I look at myself like that? And so that's to your point. That's the point you're making, because and that probably goes off into some, and you know what? If I'm really being transparent, that probably has to do with when you think about this idea of toxic leadership causes toxic stress. Toxic stress affects our defectiveness schema. We've talked about that, right?
Yep, we have. And you know, these assessment tools they can be good. However, I'd like to look at that 360 assessment, because I think I've taken that before, but it's been probably a good 20 years.
Yeah, I'll send it to you.
Okay, cool. Thank you. I appreciate that. But the reason that you rely on your peers and your subordinates and your boss to give that evaluation of you is because you got to get a third party point of view. but you got to be careful as well. Once you get those results back, you got to stay. Derek calls it the defectiveness schema. There's that. Don't let it control you. Don't let yourself get caught in the negative. You got to figure out what you can improve. Life is about assessing yourself on a constant basis.
Mm-hmm.
I hate to tell you, but if you think you poop golden eggs that smell like roses, you're wrong. So you have to give an honest assessment, and don't just get arrogant with the results of that assessment.
Yep.
Look at it as an opportunity to create a better you all the time, because we're not ever going to be perfect. There's only one being, maybe two, that's ever been perfect on this world, and you're not it. Right. I'm not it. DB's not it. So we always have room for improvement, and if you're not willing to accept that, then the assessment's not going to do any good for you in the first place.
Right. And Coach, you're making a very profound statement here about leadership. And it's interesting how we're talking about this idea of toxic leadership, and how toxic leadership, although it can create toxic stress and all these other issues, it also can develop resiliency.
Yes.
Like, my toxic leaders and the toxic environments that I've worked in have made me a better leader, have made me a better person, and so I don't have any resentment towards those leaders, because I learned a lot from them still.
Yes.
Because, and then if you say it's unintentional, then you show grace. So yes. I think sometimes it's almost like, there's a thing that I learned when I was in therapy about, is it effective for you to look at that situation like that? So in this case, even if someone was being a toxic leader on purpose, is that going to help me that I'm sitting around thinking that this person is like, they're intentionally being a toxic leader, and that's just going to create this, like, that's going to make the environment even more toxic? And I think I'm going to be real here. That's what we do at the water cooler. When we're at the water cooler, we make the environment more toxic by what we talk about.
Water cooler and smoke pit, dangerous places.
Oh, don't bring up the smoke pit, Coach. Coach, that's another podcast.
Okay.
The smoke pit. Oh.
But you know what? If you can send little spies over to the water cooler or the smoke pit, I tell you what, you can improve all your morale there. This is bad. Okay. Yes. There's no sensing session or survey or anything like that that's going to get the results of going to the smoke pit of the water cooler.
Coach, they didn't know about the smoke pit.
Coach, you brought up coming from a reformed smoker, I can tell you that the smoke pit is powerful.
It goes down in the smoke pit.
Yes, it does.
No, you know what? You want to talk about, really, you want to talk about assessing a toxic environment, you go to that smoke pit. Like you said, you go to those areas. Now, hey, don't go to the after our hours get together. When they come together and they start talking, they will open up and they will say everything that they feel with no filter. And
that's right. Once I get a little bit of grandpa's medicine in there, everything comes out.
Grandpa's medicine, hold on. Man, Coach, you know what? This is enlightening, man, because to be honest with you, it's like when you open yourself up to new learning, like you're saying, and continue to remain open-minded, you realize that you can thrive even in a toxic situation. So, like this is really about giving people hope that, like, even if you are in a situation like this right now, what are you going to, like, at the end of the day, as a warrior, what do you do about it? See, it's so easy to talk about the problem, but what's the solution? Like, what do you do? And there's always something that you can do, because going back to this whole idea of the smoke pit and the water cooler, this is the theme that I would hear coming out of those places, that if you walk away from that, you feel like you're stuck and you'll never be able to leave the environment, that like you're a victim and you're in bondage. And that goes back to how the very beginning, how I started the call about the anecdote that I gave about slavery. Like, no one is enslaved to a job. Like,
No.
truly, if it's that toxic and that bad, maybe that's your higher power trying to actually move you into something better.
Yes. Well, and when it comes to the treatments and coaching that revolve around cognitive behavioral treatment methodologies, it's all about teaching people how to turn a negative thought into a positive one, to try to find that golden nugget in that negative situation. And so if you think about everything that way, especially when it comes to constructive criticism, you're for sure going to constantly improve as a person. But that's that. We just hit 30 minutes. So I'm going to ask you, DB, you just said a bunch of stuff, but do you have any closing comments for the audience?
The only thing I would have to say, like, if you're in an environment and you're starting to see signs of a toxic leader, go in, sit and think and reflect about maybe having a crucial conversation with that leader. Have a crucial conversation. Anything in life, right? Anything in life where you ever feel friction or something like that, go have that crucial conversation. Is it going to make the environment less toxic? Maybe, maybe not. But at least it presents an opportunity for you to be heard. For going back to what Coach said about unintentional or intentional. If it's unintentional, that gives them an opportunity to correct the behavior. So
yes,
be willing to have a crucial conversation in those toxic environments with leaders that are exhibiting these traits.
And that leads us to next week's topic. We're going to be actually discussing the strategies for dealing with a toxic leader. So I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's what we're going to be doing a whole call on next time. And, when you're dealing with a toxic leader, you can lead up and down the chain of command. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that when we hit next week's topic. But thank you for everybody for tuning in. If at any point during this episode you have a question, please make sure you put that in the comments below. Also, like it, subscribe to it, share it, and just like I said, comment below. Keep the conversation going. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in to another episode of Warrior Leadership and for hearing our comments about dealing with a toxic environment, how it affects the morale of the team. Have a good day.